Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Beetlejuice. Now, many fans have been waiting decades for this movie to release, been waiting around for a sequel. I unfortunately wasn't part of that long-running hype, only because I saw the first movie a few months ago after seeing the trailer for the second one and realized I needed to go back and see the first one because this one was pretty good. And it was one of those classics that I just hadn't seen yet. I have a long list of those I'm trying to see. But with a sequel coming out, I wanted to bump the first Beetlejuice top of the list so I can watch that. Now, I'm seeing some people are speculating different points about this movie that I want to reference later. But let's talk about sort of its opening and how this transitions from a nearly 30-year gap for this franchise. So, in this movie, we sort of get sort of pacing between the real life and the afterlife. And so we get some interesting scenes in both. And ultimately, I think, and I'll tell you guys later, I think a movie dragged in the real life just a little bit too long without real story. So let's sort of get into it. So Charles Dietz, obviously the actor's not going to be in this movie. The character is being written out, and let's see how it's handled. So toward the beginning, we see that Delia has mentioned he has died. And they sort of give this comedic scene about three different ways he brutally died. And it was funny to watch. It was a funny scene. But since Delia is in love with Charles, throughout this movie, her being in love with him and wanting to be reunited with him, she sort of becomes the comic relief of this movie, which I didn't get those vibes from her characters in the first one. So the transition from movie one and two, I just don't think it was hard to picture her as the same character, which was a little strange. She didn't have bad writing or bad story. It just felt a little bit too different to feel familiar, unfortunately. So I think her character could have been handled just a little bit better. But let's go on through the movie and I'll give you guys a couple more examples of why I think this about Delia. So when it comes to Lydia, she now has a daughter, and sort of the disconnect between them is sort of propelling their side of the main story's plot. Astrid lost her father when she was young, and he happens to be the one ghost that Lydia can't see. So that's causing a lot of disconnect between them, given that Astrid doesn't believe in ghosts in the first place. Whereas Lydia now has this TV show where she's going to find ghosts. So she's sort of become famous for this. And Astrid in school is being sort of bullied for it because Lydia Dietz is bringing on this supernatural sort of question that a lot of people just don't agree with or don't like. So Astrid finds a hard time fitting in really anywhere, and she hasn't been home for a while. And this is sort of part of the story when Charles Dietz is having when they're having his wake. Astrid obviously comes back to town for the funeral, and we sort of get our collection of characters back together. Now, for Beetlejuice, obviously he has a little bit of story, but his ex, Dolores, who was with him when she was alive, she, because of circumstances, is now putting her body parts back together to reform herself, and she's looking for Beetlejuice. So this is going on in the afterlife, where Willem Dafoe's character, who is an actor but is being the cop, he's sort of looking for her and trying to get Beetlejuice to help him out with his case. So there are some interesting scenes in the afterlife, which is part of the wacky, spooky sort of lore building that the original had that I think made it iconic. And so it was interesting to see more of that in this movie than the first one, or at least different ways of the afterlife, how it works in this one. And so as the movie's going along, Charles's wake, it sort of feels like it takes an hour for the real plot to pick up. And when I say the real plot is when you think of Beetlejuice as a movie, you think of Michael Keaton's performance. He was a standout performer. I don't know why I can't say the word right in these movies. And so when we see the trailer, we see that he's back. I think a lot of fans, or probably most Beetlejuice fans, the thing they're looking forward to most is seeing him portray this character again. And so we see he comes back to the real world in the trailer, and this is something that everyone's looking forward to. The fact that it takes so long for it to happen, I think creates this sort of sense of boredom throughout different parts of this movie. So Lydia and Delia don't really have a ton of story throughout pretty much the first 45 to 50 minutes of the movie, I would say. And so Astrid is falling in love with this boy in her hometown, and this is where the plot twist takes place. She's the one that I think gets the most character development in the story. She's the newcomer for this franchise, and I think they just gave her more story than the other characters. And so, as she's falling in love with this guy, it turns out that he's actually a ghost, and he's sort of tricking her into this incantation to try to hope himself be alive again. But it turns out he's trading souls, so she would have to die. So she's now being taken to the afterlife, and this is where the story at last picks up. Is Lydia goes back, calls for Beetlejuice, tells him that she'll agree to marry him if he helps bring her daughter home. And so that's sort of what we see in the trailer. All right, so this is the plot that we're expecting. This is what we thought would be happening through the whole movie. But this ends up happening during like the last 30 minutes. So this isn't a long movie at all, but it felt like it dragged its boring parts just a little bit too long. So at this point, by the time the plot finally picks up, Adelia has ordered these snakes that are supposed to not have fangs, so she can perform this ritual, try to see Charles or something, and she ends up getting bit by the snakes and she dies. So as she puts it, dies of embarrassment. She's sort of just the joke for the movie, and she's in the afterlife. It's been a mistake. She's not supposed to be dead, and she's looking for Charles. And so she's the comedic role for this movie, which I didn't see before. So that's why I say it's just a little difficult to see her the same way, because it just felt like her writing, it felt just a little bit too different, where it didn't feel familiar. So like I said, this wasn't bad story for a character, but if this were for a different character, I think it would have been a lot better. But because it was this one, it just felt odd, and I just couldn't connect with her character, and then that means overall her story. So that's just how it was in this movie. And while Dolores is looking for Beetlejuice, and Beetlejuice is looking for Astrid, and Lydia is looking for Astrid, this is the whole commotion in the afterlife during the last 30 minutes, is looking for her. And ultimately, Lydia does catch up with Astrid, and they actually meet up with Astrid's dad. So he finally gets to be part of the movie. He helps them escape the afterlife, and they come up from the cemetery, and there's this church. So Lydia, she's dating her manager for the show throughout the movie, and he proposes to her at her father's wake and wants to get married in 2 days. And as it turns out, he just was in it for the money. So he ends up being a jerk. So his character becomes unimportant, even though he was trying to be the comedic relief throughout the movie, even though it just didn't really work. It sort of gave the awkward dialogue where he's trying to connect with a teen while trying to have these cool hip sayings that people don't say anymore. So it's just awkward. A lot of his dialogue was just awkward. And sometimes it was funny, sometimes it just wasn't. It was really a hit or miss with this character. But I thought it was fine. But when it turns out he's a jerk, his character just becomes unimportant. And so in this church, you have Lydia's boyfriend, Lydia, Astrid, Delia, Beetlejuice, Dolores. All these characters now meet up for the showdown. And unfortunately, I was just worried that by the time all these characters meet up, I was like, this is probably going to be the last 5 minutes. And it turns out it kind of was. And so it was an interesting showdown. It was funny, goofy, has this singing, dancing routine that they sort of had in the first one. So it finally feels familiar and wacky and goofy, which is what I wanted from this movie. It just felt like, knowing it's toward the end, it felt like it was almost a little too late to finally pick up with the whole story overall. So in the showdown, Astrid uses the book that's a guide for the dead. She ends up using it to bring a sandworm there and kills Lydia's manager, kills Dolores, and they end up killing Beetlejuice. And so they're written out. Willem Dafoe's cop, he takes Delia back to the afterlife. And so for Lydia and Astrid, they get their happy ending. It's kind of bittersweet because Delia is dead now, but they do get their happy ending. They are reunited and are back home and safe. But she's also seeing these dreams that Beetlejuice is still alive. So I don't know if this was supposed to be just more goofy scenes for the movie or if this is teasing his return for another sequel. It's sort of unclear. I don't know what's going to happen. We still got to see how the box results end up, what the results are for this run. I'll be interested if there is another sequel. I think there's enough lore they can continue the story for one or two more. But overall, the first one had a good ending. This one had a good ending. So we'll see what they do with it. Overall, I did like the movie. I think some characters could have been written a little bit better, but overall, it was fun. I just don't see this movie being that memorable in a couple years or so. So ultimately, I did like it. So we'll see what happens if they're gonna make another. If they do, I like the lore enough. I'll go see it, especially if Michael Keaton is portraying his classic character Beetlejuice once again. Let me know if you guys saw the movie. Let me know what y'all think. I thought it was very 50-50. I did like it more than I didn't like it. It just wasn't this grand, great movie that I thought it could have been. But let me know what you think, and thanks for sticking with me. I'll see you next time.